So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Ethics and Diversity Grand Rounds at Hamilton Health Sciences. These Grand Rounds are presented by the Ethics and Care Ecologies program at Hamilton Health Sciences, and they happen every month. And this is our first time offering this on Zoom. So welcome, and we ask for your patience as we navigate this new technical system for ourselves. Before I introduce our presenter, there are a few webinar housekeeping points that I will highlight. So I'm Andrea Frolick. I'm the director of the Ethics and Care Ecologies program here at HHS, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. The presentation will be approximately 45 minutes in length. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, as well as a chat box. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions or there are points of clarification that you'd like our presenter to make, please put those in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box as we go. And when Diana pauses for questions, I will read back to her or summarize some of the questions and comments that are in the chat. Hearing your chat and hearing your questions will sort of bring the presentation alive. So feel free to be interactive, but do be aware that all attendees and presenters can see what you put in the chat box and in the Q&A. If you know a colleague who was not able to make it to this live presentation, or you think somebody else might enjoy it, be aware that the Ethics and Diversity Grand Rounds are being recorded, and they will be posted internally on our HHS intranet hub page under Ethics, but they will also be posted externally through the Regional Ethics Network website, and we will post that website address. It's regionalethicsnetwork.com, all one word. And we'll have the link on the final slide. The recording will be available to you and to the community in the next few days. We will be hosting another Ethics and Diversity Grand Rounds in June, and the topic of that will be on ethical decision-making in times of pandemic. I'm sure a lot of you have lived experience of this now, and we'll be reflecting as an ethics program on the unique ethical issues presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Diana Tikasz. Diana is our ethics and our resilience specialist here at Hamilton Health Sciences. She works in the Ethics and Care Ecologies program with me. Diana has extensive experience on the front lines doing high trauma exposed work in her work in domestic violence for over 25 years. She joined the Ethics and Care Ecologies program in 2019 to really help to develop an integrated approach to cultivating resilience for both leaders and frontline workers involved in high stress, high trauma environments. And we really, with Diana, are interested in creating an ecological model to cultivating resilience in high stress and high trauma environments. And Diana and the whole ethics resilience team and ethics support program, which has been rapidly mobilized through our COVID response, have created some beautiful resources that are available to all of you. And again, we'll have the link at the end to promote our individual resilience, the resilience of our teams, our families, and our whole organizations. I'm so grateful to Diana for her work on the front lines, supporting the resilience of our COVID unit here at the Hamilton General Hospital, but also for sharing with us all, her deep expertise in trauma-informed care and resilience promotion. So thank you, Diana, for being with us today. I'm going to mute my line so you can take it away and just let me know when you want to take questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that lovely welcome, Andrea. And I'm having a little trouble advancing my slides. I was trying to go back to the beginning slide, which it's not letting me do. But anyway, what I wanted to just start with and say about our beginning slide is the title. So, Essential Care for Essential Workers. and of course, fostering resilience in challenging times. So I really just want to spend a moment talking about essential workers. And I think, quite frankly, all of us working in healthcare and in long-term care right now are essential workers, whether we're at the bedside or whether we are supporting the bedside or whether we are in leadership positions. And I think it's really important, and my challenge for each of you as you listen to this webinar is, I think for us in healthcare, what has brought us into healthcare is this desire to want to make a difference. We have a deep sense of caring for others. And so what can happen in that is that we put ourselves last. So I really would invite all of you to go through this presentation, reflecting on your own experiences, the place you're in now, the strategies that you may already use, and perhaps the commitments you'd like to make to yourself going forward. This is not a selfish act. This is not a waste of time. And in fact, Andrea often says, looking after ourselves is one of the most generous things that we can do. So please do that for yourselves, because we certainly are involved in a matrix or an ecology of care. And so what that means is that if we're tending to ourselves, if we're looking after our part of the web, that spreads out. That spreads out and resonates and sets the example for others to do the same. So now I'm hoping, oh, it did advance, good. Okay, so now I am going to start this presentation as I start all meetings, as I start every day with a bit of a pause and or what we call an arriving practice or a soft landing. And so I invite you to do this in whatever way is comfortable for you. I will certainly lead you through a little practice that will be maybe a minute or two long. But if that's not the way you pause, you do you. So I invite everyone to get themselves comfortable wherever they may be, arranging your body in such a way that it supports your practice, to be still for a few minutes. If it is helpful, I invite you to close your eyes as a way to assist yourself in focusing internally. And perhaps begin to deepen and lengthen the breath. Noticing with each inhale how the body expands, becomes more spacious. And with each exhale, how it lets go and settles, and perhaps even relaxes. So simply allowing yourself to rest in the rhythm of your own breath. And as you do so, you may also wish to turn your attention to your body. Perhaps scanning through the body, noticing the places of tightness, tension, stillness. Perhaps we want to pay particular focus to the area of the brow or the eyes, the jaw, the shoulders, the hands, the chest and the belly. Typically, we can hold tension in these places. And perhaps invite yourself to notice that as to what happens when you place your focus there. Perhaps your body softens even just a little. You may also wish to experiment with a sense of a smile, or actually bringing a little smile to your face. And once again, noticing what, if anything, may happen. Smile has a direct access to our nervous system and can have a calming effect. So this simple gesture can reset us. And now, before we bring the practice to a close, simply allowing yourself to drink it in, to notice if there has been any shift, and if there hasn't, that's okay too. But simply notice that in pausing, in stopping for even a moment, we have a greater sense of what's here for us. And in this pause, we have the ability to choose how we wish to move forward. And so perhaps set an intention for yourself as we bring this practice to a close as to how you wish to go through the next 40 minutes together. Perhaps with a sense of openness, presence, self-kindness, whatever that may be. And wish that for yourself now. And now I invite you to take a fuller, deeper breath. And on the exhale, refocus back into our webinar here. So folks, what I just took you through was our resilience, little resilience framework here that we refer to as PRN, or Pause, Reset, Nourish. And I'm going to say those initials were not an accident. We know in healthcare that those initials mean something very specific to many of us who work in healthcare, that this is something that we document as needed, right? And so the encouragement here, the invitation here is to engage in this practice, in this framework as needed many, many times throughout the course of our day. So I will say, I have noticed what's one of the things that has been really wonderful about this time of COVID is that so many folks have been generous about their free offerings. There's so many things that are being taught, especially around resilience and mental health and so on. And I have been so grateful. But I've also wanted to soak all these things in, which of course I haven't had an opportunity to do. A friend of mine says it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, right? So wonderful, nourishing things, but it's just almost so much. And I think the Pause, Reset, Nourish framework, what I hope is different about this framework is that it really is about helping us to create a habit. It recognizes that we already are resourceful and resilient. However, these challenging times are going to get us off kilter several times a day, sometimes for more extended periods of time. But we all inherently have tools that we use that keep us grounded, that keep us steady, that keep us solid. And so the framework is more about how do we remember to engage with these strategies that we already use. How do we remember to do these throughout the flow of our work? So it's not about solely the self-care that we engage in after our work. I've been one to say that I don't think it's particularly helpful to go full tilt all day long and then collapse on your yoga mat at the end of your work shift and say that that's self-care. I really am an advocate for weaving in little practices. So weaving in this pause, reset, nourish, sprinkling it throughout our day. So today in this webinar, I really want to walk you through kind of this framework. So it is also very much based. So the Pause, Reset, Nourish is very much based on neuroscience. It's also very much based on the science of resilience. And so I will be peppering that throughout our talk. And it's very much grounded in the concept of neuroplasticity. So what we know is that the human brain changes as long as we continue to stimulate a set of neurons. And the best way to do this is small and often, small and often, small and often. PRN, or Pause, Reset, Nourish practices, are all about small and often, small and often, small and often. That's how we start to create new neural pathways in the brain, create a habit. So what to expect over the next little bit is I do want to talk a little bit about doing trauma-exposed work and stress in the context of COVID, but I want to spend most of our time and also talking about the neurophysiology of stress. And I know that I always feel weird doing that with healthcare professionals because I know we know this, and I know we value science, but truthfully, I think us as healthcare professionals, we often don't apply that knowledge to ourselves. So again, we need to do the U-turn and look at this information in the context of our own experience in our own bodies. And then I'm going to take you through some slides and some comments and around Pause, Reset, and Nourish. And then we'll close up for questions. But please, as Andrea said, put your questions in chat throughout. So I'm hoping that this kind of meets your needs. I also purposefully chose this picture because I'm really encouraging everyone as we go through this to self-reflect. Because I think when we come into self-reflection, when we come into stillness, what kind of our vision of what's within and around us becomes much clearer. And once we have that clear vision, then we can perhaps move forward in a different way. So I invite you to do this, and there's specific places where I'm going to have you, I'm going to just ask specific questions that will prompt self-reflection. All right, so I want to take us through this diagram, and I'm going to be spending a few minutes on this slide. And I think it's important because I think we really need to identify some of the stressors. But truthfully, folks, we could spend a whole day on this slide. We're in fact living this slide right now. And as I go through and give some examples of what I have noticed as I move through my days supporting staff in the hospital, is that we are just we're saturated in these things, and so we need to be able to identify it, but we need to be able to move out of it to counterbalance these experiences. So you may want to, as I give through specific examples that I have noted, I'm not going to do an exhaustive set of examples here, but you may want to reflect on that yourself in terms of your own experience. You may want to type some things in the chat box that you've noticed as you've gone through your days. So why I like this concentric circle model, it's one that we use in the area of occupational stress or secondary traumatic stress. It's one that describes our work as trauma-focused work. Now, why I identify working in healthcare and long-term care as being trauma-focused work, that simply means that in the course of our work, we are exposed to stories of suffering and loss on a daily basis. It's different than working at Toyota or Walmart, where that those jobs can be stressful too, but we have the added stress of that exposure to suffering and loss on a daily basis. And so that's what I call trauma-exposed work. And then these are the risks that can accumulate in doing trauma-exposed work. On the right side of the diagram are things that are more individually based. On the left side are things that are more systemically based. I like the overlapping circle model because it talks about how these terms are related yet different. And we can experience one, some, or all of them. So I'll just start quickly at the top with primary trauma. So this may be trauma that we are coming in with that we have already experienced in our histories. We all have have histories as human beings. We're not immune to having experienced trauma in childhood or in our personal lives as we go through divorces or loss of loved ones or so on. And we bring that into our work. And I certainly have noticed how in the midst of this stress, because I think stress can also trigger our own past experiences, our own sensitivities from the past. So for me, I can sometimes struggle with feeling like I'm like not being good enough. And I have noticed as I move through the higher stress now that stuff is also coming up for me. So having to navigate that. And then we have this other circle of work-related traumatic grief and loss. We have a lot of this going on right now as folks are trying to find new ways of working, whether we're working at home, whether we're working on site. The way we are used to working, the predictability and the stability of our work is turned right upside down. And so that's a huge loss. Trying to figure out how to work behind a mask. How do we connect with our patients in the same way with all this PPE is challenging. And so those are losses for us, grieving processes for us, losses of our coworkers if they become ill, our concern for them, numerous losses. Direct trauma, of course, in COVID, we feel direct trauma acutely because we are in direct contact, many of us, with the virus itself. And so, that's a real fear. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to make my family sick? Vicarious trauma or secondary trauma is very much about how working in this kind of environment starts to skew our perspective. And I know I've become very hypervigilant. And I think, I'm like nervous to cough or to sneeze. And now as I walk outside and all the pollen is in the air and I have to sneeze, I almost panic because what does a sneeze mean today? It doesn't mean what a sneeze meant 3 months ago. So we start to get this skewed perspective of the world and what the dangers are. And then we have compassion fatigue and empathic strain. And I'm going to simply say here that compassion and empathy are different. I'll talk about it more in a moment, a little bit later. But I think the sheer exhaustion, so in empathy, we resonate with someone else's suffering. Holding that over a long period of time, doing this day in and day out is exhausting. And when we're exhausted, it really starts to erode our ability to be hopeful, to be optimistic, to be patient, sometimes even to be kind. And so that is very wearing. And moral distress, moral injury, that's huge for us now. There are so many variations of moral distress that I hear as I walk around the hospital from staff who are having to restrain patients that they didn't have to restrain before, for staff who can't allow that because we can't have visitors in, what that means in terms of patients having to suffer on their own, staff feeling the added weight of providing extra support. That's also very challenging for them. It just goes on and on and on in terms of those pressures. And then the working conditions, the burnout. So I'm going to say, folks, it's no news. Many of us were burnt out before COVID hit. And many of us are burnt out even more so now. I actually ran into a physician friend of mine last night as I was walking in the neighborhood. And she was telling me how she has been working every day straight for the last 3 months. And on the weekend, a colleague had texted her, just asking a work colleague asking had she got this done yet. And I guess she was a little grumpy. And yes, of course, we're all going to be grumpy because we're exhausted. We haven't had time to rest. And then we get resentful for those in our family that may have completely different situations right now in terms of, maybe not having as much work to do as we do. We need to prioritize rest, folks, and we need to give ourselves the opportunity to rest. And then, of course, we have the sociocultural context, and this is on multiple levels in terms of our own work culture. So before we went into this, we very much had a fix-it, overachieving, perfectionist kind of culture. And it did not maybe highlight resilience in the same way. And so one thing I'll say about COVID is that the COVID pandemic is it has certainly highlighted the importance of resilience. So I'm grateful for that. But it also means we really have to work on this culture change of perfectionism and needing to fix, because sometimes we just can't, like it's just not possible. And this pandemic has certainly made us has bumped us up against that. And then there's the larger culture that we exist in. And it also has become increasingly clear that even though we say we're all in this together or we're all in the same boat, we truly are not. This has highlighted the inequities that have always been present in our society in terms of it has not hit everybody equally in terms of who's being affected by COVID and the impacts of COVID. And so some of us, I'm going to say, when I think about this boat analogy, some of us are in yachts or luxury boats or speed boats. Some of us are in canoes. Some of us are in rowboats. Some of us are on leaky rafts. Some of us are holding on to whatever they can hold on to for dear life. So that's another thing that we bring into the midst of all of this. Okay. So now, right, that I've been maybe, talking about this, it feels heavy. I do want to shift. And so I am going to shift into a little bit of neuroscience here. And I just want to reassure everybody that I'm not going to do anything too fancy, because I'm a social worker by background, and I don't have higher than a grade 9 science education. But I do think there's some important things to say about neuroscience and our stress response that help us understand what's going on in our own bodies. So Dr. Dan Siegel talks about the brain in the hand, and I'm going to do a really quick version of this and just simply say that we have a downstairs brain and an upstairs brain. So if this is a representation of our brain, everything from here down is downstairs brain. So at my wrist is the brain stem in charge of heart rate, breath rate. My midbrain here, the limbic area, is often referred to as the emotional brain because of my thumbnail, which is the amygdala, which is like the smoke alarm and always on alert for danger. We do not have conscious control over that area of the brain. Up here is the neocortex, and that's where we have more conscious control. All the characteristics that make us most human are up here. Right behind our foreheads is the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, where we do our problem solving, our moral decision making, all our decision making, our impulse control. It's also linked with compassion and empathy. Really important part of the brain. But what happens is, as we get more and more stressed, as we become more and more fearful, the amygdala picks that up, and we can do what's called a lid flip. We disconnect from the thinking part of the brain. And we do this because evolution happens slowly. And back on the savannah, it was far more important that we went into reactive mode when there was a saber-toothed tiger in front of us, because that could save our lives. If we were trying to problem solve our way out of that, we would have been lunch. So that problem-solving part of the brain can elude us in the midst of crisis. So we need to be aware of this. And so what I want to say here is we also know that there's two pathways in this brain. The amygdala works really slow, very fast, and sends a signal to the body to fill with adrenaline and cortisol and react before we even know what the danger is. The high road takes longer, and it goes to the prefrontal cortex for analysis. Now, this is where we have to be careful, because if in our analysis we get stuck in negative thinking or in catastrophizing, we actually will amplify our own stress response. Because in our bodies, the saber-toothed tiger doesn't have to be real in front of us. We can just imagine that saber-toothed tiger and our body will react in the same way. So it's really important that we develop this ability to recognize what is our internal experience so that we can keep our prefrontal cortex on board and calm our nervous system. So, okay. So I like this little slide here because I think for all of us, myself included, that when we are buzzing up here in hyperactivity, or sometimes we just completely shut down because of utter exhaustion, or we want to avoid, we can get stuck in these places. And we actually have a culture that very much supports, right? Supports us amping up in the morning with some kind of substance, be it caffeine or what have you. And, you know, then we're to keep going, keep going, keep going. And then we can shut ourselves down at the end of the day with another substance, whether it be alcohol, or whether it be food, whether it be Netflix, whether it be social media, right? And we do all this distraction. And so, as I say, folks, I do this too. But we want to ask ourselves, how much are we relying on these things? And how helpful is it in the long run? And so while we can do this occasionally, we need to actually be buffering in other strategies so that we don't become over-reliant on this cycle. So what all this is to say is that, and I love this quote, and Andrea and I use it frequently, it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. So it's not our fault that we're wired up this way, that we have all these unconscious, non-conscious processes that we don't have control over. It's not our fault that we're going to flip our lid now and again, okay? But it is our fault, or it is our responsibility that when we recognize this, that we do things to re-regulate ourselves so that we can put our best selves forward. So how do we navigate this? And that's where I like the framework of pause, reset, and nourish. Okay, so let me pause here for a minute. And just as we're going to go into each of these steps, are there any questions, clarifying questions, Andrea, that I need to address here at this point?
We have no questions in the chat box so far, but Diana, I'm wondering from a neuroscientific perspective, a lot of people are reporting difficulty remembering things or
Yes.
losing words at this time. Is there kind of mass early onset of dementia for us? Or is this in some way related to the way that our brains process
Right.
the extreme stress we're under?
Yes, yes. So, yes, language, right, is kind of higher up here. So when we start to disconnect, I know when I can't find the thought I want, or find the word I want, or form a coherent thought, that my stress level is climbing. The other thing I'll say here about this analogy, so yeah, I've got my thumbnail here, and then I have the rest of my thumb. This is the hippocampus. Hippocampus and prefrontal cortex work together. Hippocampus is really important around processing emotional memories. It's also important in new learning. And so when we have a flipped lid, or we don't always completely flip, sometimes it's partial flips. If the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus don't have a good connection, we also can't take information in. And so this is another interesting point about the deluge of information that's coming at us right now. Or, I think for some, at least when this started early on, is there was this approach, well, do some of your computer learning stuff you have to do. Well, if we have flipped lids, if we're in hyperarousal, it's very hard for us to take in new information, very hard for us to learn new things. And so again, it's about how do we calm the system so that we can actually absorb, and that we can actually become, be in that responsive place versus reactive place. So I hope that helps, Andrea. Okay, we're good to go?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay. All right, so I want to spend some time on the power of the pause. So I like to kind of show this as this green ball here represents the stress of our day. And so we wake up in the morning and this ball gets going and it starts to roll, roll, roll because we got stress going at us. And I think the power of the pause, for me, what it is as this ball rolls, what it means for me is not that we let the ball roll just all on its own, where it picks up momentum and crap along the way and bowls us over at the end of the day. what I think the pause does is it helps us to put our hand in front of that stress ball numerous times a day. And each time we put our hand there, we stop the momentum of the stress. We take a little pause. And in that pause, and I love, whoops, the quote is not coming up. Oh, here it is, by Viktor Frankl. Whoops, and now it went too far. I was trigger happy. Anyway, what, oh God. All right. It is, I'm all over the place. Hang on, I'm trying to backtrack. There we go. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that pause, the pause to me, everything begins with a pause. Because with awareness, because in that pause we can become aware and then we can choose. And so this is what builds our resilience. So here's a definition of resilience. It's multifaceted. It isn't just our ability to bounce back. It's our ability to adapt in the midst of challenge. It's also our ability to foster that growth process, to actually bounce higher than before, to potentially be bigger and better than before. And I'll say more about that in a second. But the other thing is it's catching. So just like we can catch other people's negative emotions, we can also catch resilience. We can also catch calm. We can also catch steadiness. And so this is again why when we engage in pause and reset to nourish practices, when we focus on embodying these practices, we spread that out. It is not a selfish act. And so here, just say quickly about post-traumatic growth. Many of us don't know about this, but we all know about post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic growth is very much, very well researched. And what it says is that in our struggle to find a new normal during adverse events, and after adverse events, we actually can develop in ways that we wouldn't have before. So this isn't about that, you know, I wish adverse experiences on anyone. I don't. But I want to say that this is important to know because it doesn't mean that the game is over if we are going through adverse events. And in fact, that we can have a renewed sense of life. We can have a different sense of priorities, a renewed sense of hope, stronger connections as a result of going through adversity. And so here, I just want to say quickly about, this is a little tool that I use to numerous times through the day, monitor my own emotional state. It's what I call a window of tolerance. Again, not developed by me. Dr. Dan Siegel, Pat Ogden have talked a lot about window of tolerance. It's an emotional band, and an emotional band that we can go up and down in and still function effectively without becoming dysregulated. And we'll see in the middle of in the window, in that sweet zone or that green zone, that's where we're the best version of ourselves. That's kind of where we're aiming for. That's where we're grounded and alert and calm and creative and able to think and all those things. However, as we start to climb up our window, we move into the reactions of hyperactivity, hyper-alertness, over-arousal. So the fight-flight kinds of reactions, the anxiety, the anger, the worry. When we fall down towards the bottom of our window, we are withdrawing, we are numbing, we are shutting down. And if we actually pop out of our window, we've done a complete lid flip, and we are actually not very present. So I like to try to check in with myself, to do a little U-turn, notice, where am I in this moment? Am I buzzing up here, or am I dropping in terms of numbing or shutdown? And then I want to do a little reset activity that's going to bring me closer into my window. So there we go. So here we have, whoops, and now it went too far. So here we have some reflection questions in terms of, and I encourage you, to think about this now, but also if you watch this after the fact, is maybe you want to pause here and really take a moment to get a sense of what is your stress level, your evaluation of your stress level in this moment. And how do you know when you're really struggling? And I will tell you, this is a good question to ask family members or trusted colleagues, because I know when I'm at when I'm really, really struggling, I'm the least to see it. And so, you know, having a trusted person tell me, you seem a little bit wound up right now or shut down, in a kind way, of course, is really helpful, because, or them telling me what I'm like in those moments so I can recognize it. So here's about the reset, and I'm going to go through some of the reset strategies. Now, folks, what I want to say about resetting is that these are, again, based on good literature science, but everybody's is going to be different. I have in the next slides put titles in the slides in terms of the themes that I think are important, that we have strategies in all of these themes, but the actual particular activity that you do to reset is your own. I will share some ideas with you, but you know that it's boundless, it's limitless in terms of the possibilities here. So, you know, again, you want to think about here, what are you already doing that you're smattering throughout your day to help yourself cope? What are the small things you do to feel better? And really, it's thinking about what are these micro practices that we can weave in through the course of our work. Not something big that has to be done at the end of the day or on the weekend or on vacation. What are the small practices that help us to reset closer in our window over and over and over again through the day? So the first things are through rest and digest. Breathing, our breath. When we breathe in, we activate our energy. When we breathe out, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system, or calming. So I'm often, depending on where I am in my window, I'm often doing longer exhales. Stretching. So the spinal six is you know, forward, backward, side to side stretch, and the twist. So whatever it is, how you stretch. Softening the body and smiling. We did that in our arriving practice. Humor. Jokes are a way to reset the nervous system. Tears and allowing our body to shake off its excess energy. Also a nervous system reset. Singing activates the vagus nerve, which is in charge of parasympathetic nervous system. Helps us to stay engaged with other people. Walking it out. So I know when I'm on the units where staff are really stressed, I'll say, walk with me. We're going to walk together, because we want to move that emotion up and out. And as I stay calm, the person I'm walking with is going to resonate with me. So I'm going to help them balance their nervous system by me breathing and being calm. And then, of course, my favorite one here is, for folks who know me, is the 1-minute dance party. And so, you know, it's as at break or whenever, can we get a group of ourselves together or at home to do that, to play our favorite song and do a 1-minute dance party. And if you've ever done this, it really feels great afterwards. And so grounding through our senses. Feet on the floor. Right now, I'm on my carpeted floor with my bare feet, because that helps me stay in contact with my senses, with feeling grounded, with feeling solid. When I'm focused there, other thoughts don't come in the same kind of volume. SSSTI stands for all our senses, so we ground through the senses. So just recognizing a smell, a sound, something through sight, touch, and taste. And so there's a little strategy there, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that helps us calm down as well as grounds us through our senses. Internal, external awareness. This is about mindfulness practice. What mindfulness practice helps us do is recognize our own internal experience, also being aware of what's out there around us through our senses. So being able to engage in what I notice, what am I seeing, what am I feeling in my body? Okay. Values, folks. I can't say enough about values because they are truly protective. When we can be grounded in what's important to us, whether that be my sense of courage or kindness or wanting to make a difference, and reminding myself of that on a regular basis, that helps me stay steady. And I really encourage folks, again, who are watching this and listening to this at a later time, to take some moments to go through and think about what is important to me. How do I highlight that throughout my day? So, so compassion is important to me. And I'm always on the lookout for throughout the day. And every time I notice it, I pause for a moment and I drink it in. So here is my little quirky thing that I do, so all of you can see how quirky I am. But resourcing I find hugely helpful. So that's knowing what's important to me, the qualities that I want to bring into my work. And so for me, hearts really represent that compassion. I have heart earrings in my ears now. My colleague, I know a colleague I work with, or several of my colleagues actually tease me about this, because their way that they resource or reset is through humor, and they think my heart stuff is hokey, but it's important for me. And so I very purposely every morning, because I can't wear jewelry going into the hospital, but I can wear my little earrings. And I put my hearts in my ears to remind myself to go in with heart forward. Stones, I know for Andrea, stones help keep her grounded. I was given a stone from a First Nation when I was working in a First Nations community with the 4 directions. I find this very balancing, very grounding. So what are the symbols that you use to anchor into your own values? And then this is really about noticing and resetting, switching our focus. We have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Most of those are negative. Most of them are repetitive. This is then what our brain starts to starts to focus on, is the negativity. I see this all over the place right now in terms of the negativity with people. Like just the negativity towards themselves, towards others, the judgments. And so I think, being aware of this, noticing these stories that we tell ourselves, and here are some questions that can help us pull out of that, because we don't want to reinforce these stories that are not helpful to us. And then connection is hugely important, right? So folks, here the difference between these 2 words is the we and the I. Right? And I think when we get stressed, we can get into this us and them mentality, and I'm seeing it all over the place. And it's really important that we step into the we, that we know who's got our backs, because this is, the team is so important. And I had a nurse recently talk to me, we talked at Huddle about the importance of teamwork. And then later in the day, I approached her and I said, thank you so much for all the sharing you did about how important teamwork was to you. And she laughed, because she said, you know what? Right now, I'm in the midst of writing an email that's turning down a job that's maybe a safer job, I'll put it that way, out of this COVID saturated environment. I'm turning it down because this team piece is so important to me, and I want to stay. So it said a lot to me about connection. And then the compassion, we want to cultivate it. Compassion is energizing, folks. Empathy can be draining. Compassion is that ability to notice suffering, but then that desire to want to alleviate that suffering. Even if we can't do anything to make it different, we can always send well wishes. We can always wish people well. I noticed this yesterday. There was, as I went into the hospital, there was a man who was coughing and then spit on the street. And I noticed in my window, I got so angry. How dare you do that? And then I paused and I did, okay, just a minute, Diana. And I took some breaths and I went into wishing that person well. May you be well. May everybody around you be well. May we all be protected. And in this way, what we do is we ignite the caregiving response. We dose ourselves with oxytocin and each other with oxytocin rather than cortisol. Okay, and self-compassion is about doing the U-turn. And this is a beautiful practice about recognizing what's here for us and just talking to ourselves in a way that is kind and self-soothing. We're often our own worst enemies. And so if you want to do more work with this, the work of Dr. Kristen Neff and selfcompassion.org, really helpful. So those were some strategies around resetting. Nourishing, what I want to say here, and then I'm almost done, is with nourishing, we need to pause at the end in order to rewire that negativity bias that says we will register a negative instantaneously and we can get stuck there. We need to focus on a positive for about 20 seconds. And so sometimes we can engage in very good, nourishing activities, but because we don't take a moment to soak it in, we miss it completely. So taking some time to notice what's good, drinking in the good, fostering our optimism. And that doesn't mean in a Susie Sunshine kind of way. It means in a more realistic way. It means we want to take action where action is needed. We want to know what we have control over and what we don't. But we don't, it's not about just purely Susie Sunshine stuff. Gratitude, being thankful, appreciation, valuing what's good in us, what's good in others. Recognizing what's going right, not just what's going wrong. The negativity bias narrows our focus. When we can notice what's also right in this moment, that helps us keep a broader perspective. Connecting with our values, what matters to us. A resiliency slogan. So I find this so helpful, a little reminder for me. So it might be, I got this. It might be, let it be, Diana, or, this is my stuff, not their stuff, or whatever. I have lots of little slogans that help remind me to be grounded. And then savoring is taking it all in. So as we close up here, this is our resiliency model at HHS. We really want to be integrating it into the way we work. It really reflects our ecology of care and this repetition of the resilient services that we're providing. The toolkit, it has open access to anyone. And then these other components are what we have for our staff here at HHS, but they're not unique to us. You can certainly have peer support in your own organizations. We have a COPE line that we have started. We have on-site support teams. You can do this formally, informally in your own organization. Same thing with leadership support. We have webinar series and so on, and coaching that we offer. And again, this can be translated anywhere because we want to create this ecology of resilience, because resilience is rooted in habits that we can cultivate and change. So I will stop here now, knowing that there's a lot here, but I want to leave some room for questions, and I think I went a little bit longer. So I will pause.
Thank you so much, Diana. A lot of wonderful material. Thank you for that. So we have one question that's sort of about how to assess the needs of a team around what their resilience requirements are at this time. So Jody says, we're thinking about a needs assessment for our staff to help develop tactics for healing and restoring. And do you have any advice on what to ask staff to sort of get to the crux of what they need now?
Mm-hmm. So this is a big question, I'm going to say that. And I think at the very foundation of this is we need to be creating a sense of safety in our environment. So for me, I truly am a strong believer that vulnerability is the road to the resilience. It's not a weakness. And in order for us to allow for vulnerability, we have to create an environment. It's that team connection again, an environment where we've got each other's backs and we can say what our worries are. And so that's where I think we have to start. And I don't know, Jody, for you, kind of teams are at differing stages of this, right? And so if a team is already connected and able to talk about what's going on for them, I think making space to do that. We do that in huddles regularly, and allowing for, if one staff member feels safe to say something, guaranteed 5 other staff members feel the same thing. And so, so it's making some space for that and being aware of our own. And again, it's not our fault. It's how we're wired up. Some of us, we don't want to hear it, right? We want to go to a place of you know, shut that down. I don't want to hear it. That's just going to make me feel worse. And truly, I believe it's far better out and talked about so that we can move it through versus trying to avoid it, while also, though, respecting people's own individual processes. So I think, you know, these are the challenges about resilience, is about, and that's why I like the PRN framework, is this is a framework we're going to use, but you have your individual flexibility to use it and how it works for you, and then constant reinforcement. So I don't want to, like, I don't maybe advocate using and I don't think you're asking this, a particular assessment tool to say you're resilient, you're not resilient, because resilience ebbs and flows. We all have resilience. Just in this moment, we may not be feeling it so much. So I think it's more about a process and repeating over and over and over again a framework and creating a culture that we have each other's backs, and this is how we're fostering resilience. I hope I've answered your question, but if not, I'm happy also to always have more of an in-depth discussion on the phone.
So maybe I'll follow up with a quick follow-up question. I think one of the things you've really emphasized today, Diana, is that resilience is a high contact team sport. It's not about just doing our good self-care, although self-care of course is important, but because we're wired up together as a species, we rely so much on the resilience of the people around us to help us feel fired up and warmed, and that we can also be in a positive way contagious to the people around us. So there is this balance around us each being the change that we want to see in the world and taking responsibility for our own resilience, but also sort of in a positive way influencing the people around us. Can you give another example or two of how you've been experimenting with taking tools from the toolkit and integrating it into teamwork, team conversations to really create that ecology of care at the front line?
Yeah, so I think, you know, how, for me, grounding it in neuroscience is helpful because it's non-blaming. And so I've really noticed how, and for myself too, how I'm getting caught in judgment because we're living in so much more elevated fear right now. And so it's so quick to go into judgment, into blame. And so to take that into what, you know, as people get flavors of this, or sometimes I actually even just name it because people are afraid to talk about, you know, I'm feeling judgy or whatever. And often the worst judgment is towards ourselves, is I just start to openly name it, that about the judgment, the stigmatization that can happen now of those who are working directly with COVID patients and those who aren't. I've been like, there's some direct hostility that can happen. And so to, again, create that safe space to openly discuss it, grounded in neuroscience, and then say, you know, how we need to come together, or get that we go into protective mode when we flip our lids, right? But if we can create that we and that validation, and moving, if possible, into sending well wishes, that keeps our prefrontal cortex on board. And that's going to keep us connected together versus dividing us even more in this shame and blame stuff. It's not helpful, but natural that it happens. I use it now when I hear the judgment coming up in my head. I use it as a trigger to bring myself into a place of compassion, a well wish.
Thank you. So thank you, Diana. We are at 12 o'clock already. The hour went by fast. Thank you for sharing your practice, your wisdom, your scientific knowledge, and also your humanity in terms of how you struggle, but also are striving to find ways to integrate resilience into your own work and life. So thank you so much for that. This presentation will be posted on our HHS Hub in the ethics page, as well as on the resilience support page, and it will be posted in the community to the regionalethicsnetwork.com website. So for those of you who want to share this with others, colleagues, leaders, friends in your community, you can find the link to that in a day or two. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It was wonderful having you on this first Zoom Ethics and Diversity Grand Rounds here at Hamilton Health Sciences. We will be having another Ethics and Diversity Grand Rounds in June on the topic of pandemic response and ethics. So watch for that. We'll be advertising it across our region, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Until then, may all of you be safe and well and happy and whole, and take good care of yourselves as the best way to also help to take care of those around you. So have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.